Hello everyone and welcome back to Fighters Unleashed. We're just here explicitly to see Alexia's cutscenes because last time I played Fighter Unleashed I already beat the whole game as Charlie. We saw that there was no true ending. We're just here to see Alexia's side of the story this time. But because I've already exhausted all the game design there is to talk about in Fighters Unleashed, after the first cutscene, we're also going to be spending time talking about other beat-em-ups people generally consider bad. Even if I don't.
Get ready. Go!
Alright, so when I first played through Fighters Unleashed, I brought up that I think Fighters Unleashed is the worst commercially released beat-em-up in terms of overall quality, not necessarily my least favorite, but I did some digging and went to look at other beat-em-ups I thought that people might consider competitors. None of the games I explored changed my mind about Fighters Unleashed being the worst, but they did give me a greater appreciation for the beat-em-up genre, and make me a fan of a few new games. So let's look at them in order of my experience. Alright, so here we are in Double Dragon 2: The Wander of Dragons, a 3D remake of Double Dragon 2 that came out a year after Double Dragon Neon. It was not as well liked as Double Dragon Neon, to put it lightly. This is one of the most despised beat-em-ups there is, and not many people played it or even know about it in spite of that. This is the demo of the game, which only lets us play Stage 3, and I didn't get a great first impression of the game from this demo, but first impressions are never the whole picture, and after playing more of the game, I definitely think it could actually be good based on this demo, instead of the awful train wreck that most people see it as. Don't get me wrong, it has a fair share of problems like the frame rate. And the demo does an absolutely terrible job at conveying the game mechanics even if you use the how to play menu, but the combat system and game design here I think is pretty good. We can do regular punches and kicks, and we can end them in a power strike if we hold down the right trigger and press punch or kick midway through our combo. 4 hits, then a power strike, just like that. That's how we do crowd control, is with power strikes. It knocks the enemies over so they can't hit us, we gain some invincibility while we do a power strike, and we can turn around while doing a power strike. That's mostly what I use to get enemies off my back. But there are other options, such as a perfect guard and a dodge move. The idea, based on this demo, is that even though you're overwhelmed by enemies, you overcome them with a kind of rhythmic offense, where you chain power strikes into your regular combo to knock over the troublesome enemies before they can annihilate you. I'm not going to claim to have mastered this game's combat system, I clearly haven't. I still don't have the timing down for perfect guards and dodges, and those are extremely important options, because you get surrounded by enemies a lot in this demo, and I assume the game as a whole. And yeah, it's obvious to me why this game didn't succeed. The combat system isn't well conveyed, there's a high skill bar to it. Like, even I, playing as many beat-em-ups as I've played over the years, had to replay this demo like 10 times to even get through the level without dying, or figure out the timing on the power strikes. It's not simple stuff. And there are times like this where I still get clobbered because I completely lost control of the fight and I don't have the timing down for dodges or perfect guards yet. But I'd argue this is a punishment for me not being good at the game, which I think is fine. If you play old enough beat-em-ups, you absolutely get destroyed for not understanding the game mechanics or enemies and how they work, just as ruthlessly as I was there, if not more ruthlessly. A big part of many old arcade beat-em-ups is being able to intimately understand the AI and how it behaves and what your options are depending on what the AI does. I've only worked out one option, even though there are multiple, so of course sometimes I'm going to get destroyed. And it is also the case that the enemies in this game don't really telegraph their attacks super well, so much as they just hit you after a certain period of time or when they're a certain distance away. There are some attacks that get telegraphed by the boss character, but aside from that, it's mostly about anticipating how the AI behaves and what it's capable of, which was also the case in a lot of old beat-em-ups. The Punisher comes to mind, and so does Final Fight. Alright, here's the boss of the demo, Burnov, and we're going to beat him by spamming the special attacks that we've been picking up across the stage. Those are the orbs. There's one right behind us in that dragon statue. Those orbs give us special moves we can use by pressing right trigger and A, and we're just going to spam those until Burnov dies. Just because I appreciate this game's combat system and I think it's a good experience does not mean that I'm not going to cheese it. If anything, the fact that this is the only thing I've found to cheese in the demo is an accomplishment. I cheese beat-em-ups really fast and really easily most of the time, but the only cheese I could find is spamming special attacks at Burnov, and that's a pretty minor oversight. It's not as though Double Dragon 2 on the NES didn't have much worse cheese. I seem to recall the, what was it called? The Demon Exploding Dragon God kick, or the flying knee, or the high jump kick, whatever you call it. That move ended most encounters pretty swiftly, and it was easy to spam after you got the timing down. And that's the demo for Double Dragon 2: The Wanderer of Dragons. I don't think it was all that bad. Hopefully you can see what I meant about Alexia's story being less compelling and having less to it. But, we have other games to play while we're waiting to get to the next boss, which will be Tetsu. You also do this motorcycle fight with the ninjas out of order in Alexia's story, or maybe more in order. It's hard to say whether Charlie or Alexia's story is in the right order, but I think Alexia's story makes more sense the way it flows, even if it's a worse story. Anyway, I think it's time we move on to the next in-flight movie. This one will be a lot more similar to Fighters Unleashed than Double Dragon 2 was. This is Streets Ablaze, an early access, unfinished, side-scrolling traditional beat-em-up. The developer's not actually sure if they'll ever be able to finish it. The game was originally $15, it is now free. There are many things about it visually that don't work out. The animations are pretty broken in just about every respect, for example, but all of the mechanics function. We have our basic punch combo, but we can also hold down punch to do power strikes, which uses a bit of that blue meter below Cool's health bar. And timing the power strikes so that way they adequately control crowds and down the enemies seems to be the key to this game. I find that mixing the power strikes into the regular combo is a lot more effective than trying to use them separately. We can also do normal beat-em-up moves that you expect from pretty much any game in the genre, such as grapples by walking into the enemy, even if that really messes with the animation. And no matter how ridiculous the grapples may look, they also serve a utility. We can still throw enemies into other enemies. We can pick up weapons, and the weapons work fine, and there are fun traditional beat-em-up hazards like that car that keeps sweeping down at the bottom of the level. Everything about the game works, even if the polish isn't there, and I think that's what's most important. And that's also why it's a far superior game to Fighters Unleashed, even if it may happen to look worse. For all that Streets Ablaze looks jank and cheap, the game design is still here. Everything works, there's a winning strategy, you can figure out how to play it, and at no point that I've seen do you start taking damage from nowhere like you do in Fighters Unleashed. Was $14.99 a lot of money for early access to this game? Yes, absolutely. When they lowered it to $10, was that still a lot of money for early access to this game? Yes, absolutely. Especially since they eventually made it free and couldn't even promise they would continue working on it. But at least you would get a game that functioned all of the way. I also personally think there's a lot of charm to the presentation. It doesn't look good. I highly doubt it's what the final product was meant to look like, but it's cute to me. The slow down kill cam when you hit an enemy in a particular way, it looks nice in plenty of games, not so in this one. It just kind of highlights the animation bugs, but that's entertaining, right? Like, that's not necessarily a negative. I love when I'm playing Ride to Hell and the slow-mo kill cam kicks in when the enemy's physics freak out and their body parts flop everywhere, so of course I love this too. I suppose we should talk about the distinction between enemy types. The enemy types in this first level, there's not much distinction between them, but later there are enemies that block and you need to either use a power strike or grapple to get through their defenses. And I like that. It actually reminds me of an enemy type from The Takeover, which is a much better indie revival of games like Streets of Rage. And also super similar to Streets Ablaze and Fighters Unleashed. Right here we'll get swamped on both sides by enemies, but the crowd control in this game is pretty easy after you learn how the grapples work and how to link power attacks into your normal combo. And there's also ample health pickups if you destroy objects in the environment, though I wouldn't blame you if you have difficulty discerning which items you can break in the environment. And it might not seem like there's much level design in this game, but enemy placement is just as crucial, and the enemy placement and the proceeding of events checks out. Like, we just had the hardest fight in the level because enemies swarmed us from both sides, and now we're going to confront the guy who's been driving that car around. You know, it may seem pretty simple, but a lot of beat-em-ups don't have the hardest fight of the level come right before the boss. A lot of times in beat-em-ups it seems like the enemy placement is an afterthought. Not so in Streets Ablaze. Ortho himself isn't a particularly threatening boss because he has no counter to our throws, as you've been seeing, but that's Streets Ablaze's first level.
Ready. Go.
Do you get it? Parasol Chemical, like Umbrella Corporation. Do you get it? I got it. I understood the reference. Has there been a Resident Evil beat 'em up, actually? I kind of wish there was. I know there was a Resident Evil third-person shooter called Operation Raccoon City, though I guess you could argue 4, 5, and 6 are also third-person shooters, just not to the same degree. I actually rather liked Operation Raccoon City. I'm hoping that this rapidly snowballing discourse about Resident Evil and my hot takes regarding Operation Raccoon City will prevent you from realizing that I have absolutely run out of transitions between other games. Like, we're going to talk about another game that isn't Fighters Unleashed in just a moment, but I don't have a clever way to transition there. I guess I can try my best. I've been playing the Cobra Kai video game with my roommate Nathan. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up. It's pretty good. We're on the second storyline together. I plan on S-ranking every level. And we're about to talk about, in this video, we're going to talk about Fist of Awesome next, which is nothing like Cobra Kai at all. So, you know. Hello and welcome to Rock Zombie, a side-scrolling beat-em-up. Who could have guessed, where we play as a rock band during a zombie apocalypse. The whole thing is heavily inspired by 90s arcade games and by 90s rock and 90s grunge and punk stuff in general. There's a lot of harsh, hazy purple, red, and blue lighting that really sells the 90s band atmosphere. The music is incredibly appropriate for the scenario. It just feels like they knew what they were doing. The artistic direction is phenomenal, if you ask me. We have two kinds of primary attacks. We have a vertical attack and a horizontal attack. Horizontal attacks can't hit enemies that are crawling on the ground. Vertical attacks can, and if you mix them together, you get combos. The character we're playing as is Crystal, and she has the highest attack stat, so it only takes 2 hits to get rid of the enemies. We just do a vertical and then a horizontal hit, and that performs the rock and roll combo, which adds to our mana bar underneath our health up there. And our mana bar is what we use to deal with zombies that are a bit more threatening, like maybe these flaming zombies that explode on the ground if you don't want to get too close to them. Because if you get too close to them, they explode. There are 3 kinds of spells we can cast with our mana. We can cast a laser beam, we can shoot a fireball, we can make magic rain from the sky like that. And that's my preferred method for dealing with that green zombie you just saw. Green zombies can spit bile on the ground that removes, as last I checked, I'm pretty sure exactly half of your health bar. Something to appreciate about this game is the side areas like this that you don't really have to engage with. All the enemies will eventually come with you. But if you bother running around and exploring side areas like this parking lot that are a slight bit off the beaten path, you'll find additional coins, health pickups, 1-ups, and the coins you get in this game can be used to buy new guitars and outfits and such, and I think concept art? Sadly, you can't use the coins to buy the game's soundtrack. Anyway, Rock Zombie was not a well-liked game. It still isn't a well-liked game. The opinion on it hasn't much changed. Honestly, I don't think there's much wrong with it. The combat system is simple but effective. You have a small variety in enemy types, admittedly, but they do their job, you know. Some are vulnerable to both kinds of attacks, some are only vulnerable to one. You can use combos to kill them quicker and fill your mana faster. And the varying enemy types require different kinds of attention. The style of the game, I also think, is perfect. I love the game's style. I love that there's a drum hit whenever it's time to go to the next screen. I love that the health pickups are cassette tapes. I love that the 1-ups are vinyl records. I love everything about the game's style. I think it all just comes together beautifully. And it feels super arcadey, which is absolutely what the game seems to be going for. I do understand, though, why the game is not well liked. For example, you see those spider webs on the ground? If we step in those, that deals, I think, half our health bar worth of damage because those spider webs are actually a trap. You wouldn't know that. They just look like spider webs, and they're easy to miss on the ground. But those are hazards, and this isn't the only time the game pulls that. There are a lot of difficult to avoid hazards that you have to keep your eye peeled for at all times. And especially if you're playing on the hardest difficulty like I am, where you have limited lives, it's a bit frustrating running into those hazards because no matter how good you are at the combat, dealing with the hazards is an entirely different procedure. It's just about how closely you're eyeing the screen. Another reason I'm pretty sure this game wasn't well liked is the fact that you can only play it in single player. I mean, I play most beat-em-ups in single player anyway, and honestly, I don't think co-op would add much in a game like this. But I understand that there's an expectation for the genre, and a lot of people were disappointed, even though I don't think it would be fair to be disappointed. I also was wrong about this game not having anything in common with Fighters Unleashed, by the way. It is single player, it is a side-scrolling beat-em-up, that one's a given though, and there are vehicle sections. All of those things are in common with Fighters Unleashed. There's also the fact that you have to kind of get good at Rock Zombie to finish it. There's not a lot to get good at, but I saw people complaining about how the green zombies remove half your health bar if they spit bile on you. And while that's true, that's easily remedied by using magic when a green zombie is nearby, as I did just a moment ago. It's not Like, there's a solution to that. I need to stop. I'm gonna start ranting about how people are bad at video games and bad at appreciating art if I don't stop. But yeah, people thought it was underwhelming. They didn't like that it didn't have co-op, and a bunch of small things like the hazard placement and the difficulty being too high for most folks, I suppose. It's definitely not a bad game, though. I've played through it a few times now. By no means is it bad. You may have noticed that in addition to Alexia's story being less impactful and having less going on, the presentation of the cutscenes in Alexia's story is significantly worse than Charlie's. Alexia really seems like an afterthought because aside from her beginning and end cutscenes, there's nothing particularly special about her story, and although she does have a slightly different moveset, it's not different enough to warrant an entire separate player character as is. Obviously, they couldn't make the game the way they wanted to. Alexia probably had a lot more distinctive features in the game they had originally planned to make, but that's not what we're playing right now. And we're almost at the home stretch. I've only got one more beat 'em up to show you before we hit Quaddle's level. And this one has a lot of things in common with the other ones that we've already played and I've already talked about. Of course it does. Alright, strap yourselves in for one last adventure. This is Fist of Awesome. It's a 2.5D side-scrolling beat-em-up, very traditional. There are a few different things about it. Like, for example, we have regenerating health, and the enemy types are all mostly the same. But it is the case that this is a functional game, just like Streets Ablaze and Rock Zombie. There is design here. There are minimal glitches that affect the gameplay. This game was originally $7, I believe, and I bought it, but now it is free. Sort of a trend that seems to be happening. And, you know, I say it bothers me. It does a little, but it's still a good thing that these games became free, regardless of how I feel about it, because that means more people get to experience these games. Anyway, Fist of Awesome is a game where you have a lot of moves at your disposal. You can kick to stun enemies, there's the grapples and throws, there's a punch combo, and you can hold the punch key in the middle of the punch combo to do a more powerful combo, but you can also just hold the punch key normally to make a giant flaming fist come out and knock the enemies over. That's the attack we're doing right now, over and over. It deals a lot of damage, more damage than any other attack you have, to my knowledge, and it knocks the enemies down. It is super beneficial to use. There's no reason not to spam it. And you're supposed to be discouraged from spamming it because there's a bit of a wind-up to it. It's not the fastest attack, but if you've ever played a beat-em-up before and understand anything about spacing between you and the enemy or timing on slower attacks, you'll adjust pretty quick. And after you adjust, there's no reason not to spam the special attack like we're doing. That's basically just the whole game. And this is a pretty long game for the kind of content that's in it. They usually spam just one enemy type at you over and over, and even when a new enemy type does appear, you evade them the same way as the previous one you fought. The bosses don't even feel like bosses so much as larger enemies, and the same strategy works just as well on them. There's not a lot to sink your teeth into. After you've solved the puzzle, there's nothing really in the game. We level up if we get enough score, and we can assign points to various stats. I've leveled up the special attack all the way, which is this big flaming fist we're spamming, and that seemed to be the optimal solution to all of my problems. It makes the levels go faster, it kills the enemies quicker, it's easier to control crowds with it. I just really can't think of a reason you would do anything but use this one attack. And doing this over and over for like an hour, I think, an hour and a half maybe, I can't remember exactly how long the game goes, is not the most enjoyable for me. It's not the most fun, but I'm also not gonna pretend that the game works differently than it does. It's not a bad game, everything about it functions. It's just, I think most people would get extremely tired of the tedium.
Get ready. Go!
Here we are again at the final level, and I'm tired. This game makes me kinda sleepy, but we'll use this opportunity to talk about how Alexia is different from Charlie for a little bit, at least. Both Charlie and Alexia have punches and kicks, and they can both attack while dashing. Alexia's attack while dashing has a much longer reach, and that alone makes her more useful. It's easier to combo into an enemy from Alexia's dashing attack than it is with Charlie's dashing attack. You know, in spite of it all, in spite of this long journey and how much time I've spent on Fighters Unleashed and other beat-em-ups alongside Fighters Unleashed for comparison, I still love Fighters Unleashed. Not in spite of its flaws, but because of them, in a way. It's a unique, new experience. All art is a unique, new experience. And if this game were to ever get fixed up someday by some miracle, I hope that this version, the version I'm playing right now, the original product, is still available somewhere, somehow. Because the original art will always be the original art. It's part of the history, part of our history. And preserving stuff is ironically getting both easier and harder as technology advances. We should be able to preserve everything because of how digital stuff is. You can copy and paste stuff anywhere, really. But there are so many measures in check to stop people from doing that, to stop them from preserving original art or ideas. I worry people think that my love of physical media is for the fact that it's physical media, but that's not it at all. Digital is better, it's just that somehow companies are able to control digital more than they are physical, which is deeply unfortunate. I don't mean to sound like a grandma, but, you know, I kind of liked when you got a thing and that was the whole thing and no one could just take it away from you whenever they felt like it. They couldn't come to your house and change it. You had the art and that was it. Somehow in the transition to the digital age, art has evolved death. It didn't need to. There's no reason for art to have to die. No one else should be able to tell you the right way to engage with a piece of art. No one should be able to determine how long you can engage with that art or what you get from it. And if someone stumbles on these videos of me playing Fighters Unleashed years and years from now, even if I'm dead, I hope that Fighters Unleashed is still playable in some format. I hope that people can still experience it in this way. The original art, the way it was released first. The Android version that was on the Google Play Store, as far as I can tell, is already gone. It's still on Steam as last I checked, but will it be when I upload this video? Who knows? Alright, I think that's enough rambling. I gave Fighters Unleashed its day in the sun, and now it's time to bring this Let's Play to a close.